The fact that you can't talk in school cafeterias and you don't have recess anymore really bothers me about school days.
The school day is 426 minutes. So just think about that. You know, if you're on the fence about homeschooling, that's 426 minutes every single day that you get with your child to be the one that influences them.
How many hours is that a year? I've read different estimates, 10, 12, 15,000 hours that your kids are in school every year. Welcome to the Zan Tyler podcast, where we help you thrive in your homeschool journey. Today, we're continuing our conversation with my dear friend, Ginny Yurich. And if you missed our milestone episode number 200 from last week with Ginny, make sure you go back to catch up. Ginny hosts the 1,000 Hours Outside podcast and is the author of Until the Streetlights Come On and Homeschooling, You're Doing It Right Just by Doing It. Please enjoy the rest of my conversation with Ginny. Okay, so Ginny, you started the 1,000 Hours Outside without knowing you were starting a movement. But when did you decide to homeschool in that whole process?
We always knew we were going to homeschool because I was a public school teacher. So you brought that up earlier.
So, all right. So back, what years are this? This will help me get this in.
I left the classroom in 2000. In 2007 is really when I left the classroom, but I had one final year as administrator, which was very eye-opening for me. I got an administrative job where I got to help. I mean, I put help in quotes because I don't think it was the right thing, but it was making sure that all of the teachers were giving the same assessments in all of the different grades from kindergarten to 12th grade. They were really trying to make everything very assembly line-ish across the schools. And so that was my job from 2007 to 2008. And then that was my last brushing of shoulders with the public school education system, 2008.
So did you have kids at that point?
That's when we had our first in 2008.
Okay. Yeah. So then you came home.
So I think school got out. I did some teacher development. We were actually talking about this. In Michigan, school lets out a little bit later. It lets out usually mid-June-ish. And so then there was 2 weeks of professional development that I helped out with. And then that ended on a Friday. And then, our first was born on Monday, something like that. Monday or Tuesday. One day I went into the hospital, that type of thing. So right up until the end. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so when did you start thinking about homeschooling in your teaching career? I mean, was it when you were single? Was it after you got married and you started? I just want to know the progression.
I think when I got pregnant. I got pregnant, I think we just knew from the get-go. And maybe partially it was because since I had the administrative job from 2007 to 2008, that timing coincided with full-day kindergarten starting. So up until that year, 2007, it was half-day kindergarten. I think nationwide. I mean, that's what I did.
Right.
Most people had done half-day kindergarten.
What I did. Yeah.
And between 2007 and 2008, it changed to primarily being full-time kindergarten. I think for a couple years, they phased it. So you had the option, if you wanted to drive your kid to such and such school, you could still do half day. I don't think that exists as much anymore. But I was part of all of those conversations, Zan, where the teachers were saying, this isn't going to be good for these kids. They're too young. They're going to be exhausted. They're already not getting enough time to play, all of that. The teachers were pretty up in arms about it, knowing the 5-year-olds that they were spending time with. And then I saw that most of that time went toward academics and not toward the things that to me are, from what I've learned, are very protective for child development and necessary for those early years. So we knew from the get-go, I'm on a personal level, I don't think 8:30 to 4:30 for a 5-year-old child to be gone for, and some are a little bit shorter, but that's what it was for us. The bus came at 8:30, comes back at 4:30 in the afternoon. That's too long of a day. That's all their best hours. They come home, they're exhausted. They're giving homework now. So, what do you have? A couple hours with them?
Where did you fall on that spectrum when you were administrating? Were you beginning to understand, or did you always know that was bad for kids?
That's an interesting question. I think intuitively, don't we all know?
Yes.
I think I guess, and I think part of the confusion is that when you're not in the classroom, you assume that they are that they are doing the very best they can to accommodate for the developmental needs of children. So I remember sitting in these meetings with these kindergarten teachers who are passionate, who loved kids. And they said, okay, if we're going to have another half a day with these kids, they're going to have a nap. We're going to make sure that we bring back the art easels and bring back the station with the dolls and bring back. And I didn't know that they had gotten rid of those. See, that's the thing. I think you might not be aware. When I went to kindergarten, you hugged. My teacher was Mrs. Kroll. She came to my wedding. She gave you a hug before you came in. You played for a couple hours. That was pretty much it. Maybe you sang the alphabet song. And then you went home at 11 o'clock to have lunch with your mom. So I think as an adult, you think, oh, it's probably very similar. And I did not realize that it is not.
Yes. That's telling. And I can remember my mother was a public school teacher. And for the first years she taught, first grade would end at 12:30 for the first 6 weeks. And then it would go to like 1:30 and first graders were out. And then she said the push came for all day first grade. And that was before kindergarten was even a thing. And then I started with kindergarten and you just see that progression that school just eats up more and more time and more life and more money. And we're not getting the intended results.
That's right. In fact, I think we're getting opposite of what we would hope to get. Dr. Peter Gray talks about that quite a bit. He talks about how, and Dr. Peter Gray wrote a book called Free to Learn. And I think it's a really good one about child-directed education. You may not agree with all of it, but he says kids are biologically designed to self-educate. And so he talks about how his school day was 6 hours when he grew up, 6 hours, and 2 hours of the 6 hours was recess.
Wow. And now, that's the first thing that gets cut. Or the little boys who need to be out playing at recess the most are always the ones staying inside being punished for being active during the school day.
That's right.
I mean, that's that shrinking recess. The fact that you can't talk in school cafeterias and you don't have recess anymore really bothers me about school days.
Yeah, it's not biologically appropriate for children, and they're struggling. There's a lot of reasons why that is. The average American, recess in the United States is 22 minutes. Across the entire United States is 22 minutes a day for the whole day, for this lengthened day. In the school district that I grew up in, they get one 20-minute dedicated recess in the afternoon, one 20-minute dedicated recess. That's from kindergarten all the way through 5th grade. And then they get a 45-minute lunch recess time, but they weren't able to say this is how much the kids actually get to play. It takes a long time for kids to figure out what they're going to play. So 20 minutes is actually not play. 20 minutes is figuring out what you're going to play. And so there is a book that I really love by a man named Dr. William Stixrud and Ned Johnson called The Self-Driven Child. And one of the concepts that they talk about in that book is that lack of control is what causes the most anxiety and the most sort of upsettedness you could have about life when you feel like you have no control. And that is what's happening in these 7-8 hour days that are timed down to the minute, where there's really no space to breathe. And I interviewed this man recently named Dr. Bruce Perry, who's a trauma specialist. He's written some phenomenal books. And he talked about how the brain works, that the brain needs dosing and spacing. Very little dosing. You get a little dose of a new concept, and then you need space for your brain to kind of roll it around for it start to
it. Yeah,
exactly. And then there's a man named Dr. Jared Cooney Horvath who wrote a book called The Digital Delusion, and it's about technology in schools. And going back to piano, he said if you practice any sort of a musical instrument, if you have calm time after, that's not screen time, not going on to the next activity, he said your brain continues to practice it. Your brain, without you even knowing, is practicing your song. And then at night, it consolidates the information. So that goes along with Dr. Bruce Perry. He says, we're dosing, no space. So it's not getting any time to set in the brain, it doesn't actually really work to do it that way.
Right. Well, it's funny at FPEA after you did the keynote, and I took pictures, I took screenshots of several of those quotes because I really wanted to think about them later. And so I went back to my room, and while I was preparing for my next talk, I thought, I'm just going to sit here for a minute and process after you spoke. And it was amazing what just that little bit of tail end reflection did, out of the crowd, away from conversation, and they're all concepts I've been exposed to many times before through you and other people. But it was still, that reflective power is really something else. I've never thought about that before.
And they're not really getting it. So when I went and spoke at a school board meeting about the fact that the recess was not enough time, and they put up a chart that the school day is 426 minutes. So just think about that. If you're on the fence about homeschooling, that's 426 minutes every single day that you get with your child to be the one that influences them and to build that relationship. If you're on the fence, I would throw out another book, Dr. Gordon Neufeld, Hold On to Your Kids. Kids are supposed to orbit around their parents and around their family. That is the norm. That's the healthiest for them. But 426 minutes every single day, Monday to Friday, the school is getting with your child. And 425 of the 426 minutes are accounted for. There's no spacing.
And, how many hours is that a year? I've read different estimates, $10, $12, $15,000, 15,000 hours that your kids are in school every year. And especially if it's secular education, there's no way to combat that or negate that or give the other side of that, where it's actually got chance, like you were saying, to seep into their soul a little bit.
Yeah. And then they become what's called peer-oriented, which is a fascinating thing to read about because peers are fickle and are not dependable and can be mean. And you become almost opposed to your parents, and it can start very young. So it's something to be aware of. All of these things you hope. For me, I would read these things. Even just recently, I read this Gordon Neufeld book, Hold On to Your Kids. And, you get a little bit of... it hits you inside and you're like, okay, I need to do something about this. Maybe I make a small change. And I think you're meant to respond to these things that you read and learn in order to better yourself and your family.
Yeah, that's amazing. So, all right. So let me switch a little bit here to high school. How many high schoolers do you have now?
3.
Gosh, can you believe that?
So fun. It's so fun. It's wonderful. We have had 0 of all the things that people are so nervous about and talk about with high schoolers. 0.
I would just tell people, if you're homeschooling and you're nervous about homeschooling, just jump in because those are really the best years. Your kids, you've taught them all how to read at this point. Most of them know how to study a little bit on their own, at this point. And you just get the great part of their lives before they leave. And I had a friend call me the other day, and she said they want my kids in high school. And I said, of course they want your kids in high school. You've trained them to be great grown-ups, and their test scores are good and they're leaders and they'll make the school look good. But you miss the best part. And it's seeing them develop and follow their interests. I had so much fun with the kids in high school. Okay, this is about you. So tell me about that adjustment.
Well, I think they have fun too, right?
Yeah,
they have fun with them.
They do.
And they don't have to get up so early. There's a lot to it. By the time you're in high school, you have a pretty good sense, especially if you've had a lot of time to think about it as you grow up. You have a pretty good sense of who you are and what you love. And we did a dinner at FPEA with Sarah McKenzie, and she has Read Aloud Revival. I love her stuff. I really love her book, Read Aloud Family. It was a encouraging one for me, especially in the beginning years. I still love it. But we kind of went through, she's got 6 kids, we've got 5. What is this one interested in? We kind of went down the line. And it just made me think they're all interested in such different things because they're individuals. And that high school time, instead of it being some rat race and just exhausting, and also all the peer pressure and all of those type of things, they really get that time to hone in on what they love.
I love John Taylor Gatto's writings on the high school years because he talks about how school doesn't prepare children for life anymore. And it's
Right.
certainly don't learn anything in school anymore that prepares them for career. And that was really, as I was reading him, my boys were high school age, and I thought, this is so powerful, and it is so true. So your kids are not missing out on a lot. I can tell you that. One thing I love about you, Ginny, I want to come back to the high school thing. It's just all the books you've read. And I remember in your keynote section, you've got a picture of you holding all those books, like this stack of 12 books about learning and homeschooling. And I thought, oh, that's so pitiful. I think about when I started homeschooling. I'm a book lover too. I had one book. I think how glorious it is now that there's all this information and all this support. And I really appreciate all the research that you bring to families through your podcast and through 1,000 Hours Outside. It's really
I would say homeschooling is very research backed, and especially it's not necessarily it's the parts of homeschooling where kids have time. It's the parts where they're around their family. It's the parts where there's lack of pressure. John Holt talks about that. He says, we know what contributes to learning. It's free time. It's lack of pressure. It's all of these things, right? We know that's where kids really dive deep. And so it is very research backed. However, it's also countercultural. So I think to continue to feed your mind with podcast episodes or books that are confirming and showing the research, I think that's helpful because it can be hard and sometimes you feel like you're losing your way. Maybe you want to quit. So you go back to some of these things you've read to remind yourself.
Joe, my husband Joe, has always said if he believed in reincarnation, he would want to come back as a homeschool boy. Because, he just loved the outdoors. And you know how funny he is. And not too many teachers appreciated his humor. I mean, the kids would be rolling on the floor. But so he said, he would just look at Ty and John and he thought, why didn't I have this? This is pretty amazing. And so that makes me laugh. But back to high school, are there any notes or caveats or anything you would give to parents about pressure for college, or how do you know when you're doing enough, or any worries that people have? Because people really do. I can remember when we started in high school, of course, it was a whole different animal then. People were saying, when are you going to put these kids back in school? How are they going to get into college? Now, thank goodness, college is one of many options after a kid finishes high school. And Rick Green was at FPEA, and he has this 9-month gap year where they learn all about citizenship and the history of the founding fathers. And, just this, there's so much out there now for kids when they graduate, not just college, the trades, all those things. So this podcast is brought to you by BJU Press Homeschool. Homeschooling is an exciting adventure we take with our children. One of the most challenging parts of this journey is choosing the curriculum you want to use. BJU Press Homeschool is a curriculum you can trust. All the books, resources, and videos have been designed with you and your child in mind. Their curriculum is educationally robust and rich, taking into account that children have different learning styles, strengths, and needs. Mom, you are in charge. BJU Press Homeschool is here to come alongside and support you. Do you need help with the teaching load, or is there a subject you just don't want to teach? Their amazing video courses are available for all grades and almost every subject. BJU Press Homeschool believes that homeschooling can produce a new generation of students who know God, love their neighbors, and stand firm in their faith. For more information, go to bjupresshomeschool.com. That's bjupresshomeschool.com.
Okay, a couple resources I would recommend. Rachel Kovac, who I know has been on your show, is a dear friend of mine. She came out with a book recently called Their Future is Shining Bright, which is about homeschooling through high school. And she goes through a bunch of the different types of lanes that you can go in, and then also has a pretty robust career section at the end of her book where you can look up different ideas. There's a woman I really love named Hannah Maruyama. She's also been at FBA before, who has a podcast and a program called The Degree Free Way. Now, she's not against degrees at all, but she says that the research shows, and I think she's done the research, that only 7% of jobs legally require a college degree. So 93% of jobs do not legally require a college degree. Now, this is different wherever you're listening in from. Now, in Florida, I think they have some sort of a scholarship program. It's called Bright something, where in some cases, I think you can go to college for free. I don't know the details to that. But Hannah's point is that if you come out and you have a lot of debt that you have to pay back, that limits your choices moving forward. And also, if you can start your entrepreneurship journey at 18 or 19 and be 4 years in, by the time everyone else is just getting, she says, buying their piece of paper.
Yeah.
She says buying their degree, which is controversial wording.
Right,
But it just causes you to think. She has a phenomenal workbook where you go through your budget, you talk about where would I like to live? What kind of hours would I like to have? These are important questions. Do I want to work remote? Do I want to work in the office? Would I like to live in the country? Would I like to live in the city? All of these things matter. And so she says you kind of work backwards then in combination with things that you're good at or interested in. How do I get to this life that I want? Do I need to earn $80,000 a year? Do I need to earn $150,000 a year? What types of jobs pay that? And if I wanted that job, what type of experience would I need to have? What certifications? Do I need to go to college? So all of these questions she helps hammer out. We've done this with our oldest. We'll go out to dinner. We'll go through this workbook with him. So he's going to try his hand at entrepreneurship. This is another thing I learned about. There's so many things. Rory Groves has a book called The Family Economy. It's a really thin one about how historically the family was an on-ramp to career. And so you can start to think of your family in that way, which has been, that's another thing I read that was really challenging to me. I think often we think, okay, I'm my own individual person and you're your own individual person, so go do your individual thing. But he talks about how if you have some sort of a family economy, some sort of a family thing that you do, your family economy can expand based off of the interests of the child that God has given them. So here's the example in our home. I've got a podcast. You've got a podcast. Mine is not on YouTube. And I've got a son that's really interested in video work. So he could possibly make a documentary about 1,000 hours outside. He could start to get our podcast episodes up on YouTube. We could be a part-time client of his as he starts to grow his business. So we're starting to look at our family. Now, not every family is going to be in this situation, but if you've got young kids, and we're heading toward tapestry economy, tapestry employment, these are some things you might want to think about. Maybe you've got a 10-year ramp to sort of have some opportunity for them to try different things through what you have going on.
And I think for grandparents who are watching their kids grow up, and also for kids who, where both parents went to college, you've got to make a little bit of a mental shift, because it used to be that you had to have a college degree for almost every meaningful job. Ty had to have one for sales. John had to have one to go to law school. Lizzie had to have one to get into news. I'm not sure that's true anymore. And so you make that mental shift to the trades with AI coming, but it takes some mental work on the top of parents and grandparents, I think, to embrace what's happening. And
yes, and I think the cost of college has skyrocketed. I got in and out of the University of Michigan with a degree and a teaching certificate for $10,000. That's not that much money in the course of 4 years. I could make $2,500 a summer. Now, my grandparents had paid for 2 years of it. They had bought something when I was born, so that was like a 2-year cost. I took some extra classes and things because those were cheaper if you took extra beyond the 12 credit hours. But the Michigan State University is currently $50,000 a year.
It's hard to believe, isn't it? I know. I can't remember when I went to college. This is way before you. It was either $4,500 a year or semester. Our college now is like $72,000 a year.
Yeah,
we
so
want
that's
to.
really different.
Yeah,
And if
it's
only
very
7%
different.
of jobs
Yeah.
legally require that. So what Hannah says, Hannah Maruyama, she says you apply for everything anyway. Even if it says you need 10 years of experience and you need a college degree, if it doesn't legally require, she says you apply, and then go in and knock their socks off, because you're a homeschooler. So you're used to talking with people and that type of thing. And if you're willing to go in and show up and have a good attitude and learn and train, you're probably going to be okay. There's going to be something that you can find. Or think about this, especially if your kids are younger, possibly what you're doing as a family can be an on-ramp for your child's career. That's a really different way to look at homeschooling. But in some ways, it might make sense for some families.
Well, and it's so much easier, I think, to do that within the confines of the home, adjust to a new economy or a new work economy or those types of things, because you're used to doing something against the flow anyway.
That's right.
And so,
and you're small enough, right, to pivot. I think that's one of the disadvantages of an institutional system. They just cannot. There's too many cooks in the kitchen, right? Is that the saying? If every second grade classroom has to look like every other second grade classroom, the teacher cannot be autonomous with the things that they see coming. And so your best bet is to be home so that you can start to adjust and look ahead.
So one of the things, okay, I'm totally changing topics now, that I remember you told me, or I read in one of your books, it might have been your first book, When the Streetlights Come On, but it talked about learning new skills, how you had to learn so many things you were uncomfortable with, like taking pictures, for example, but how good it was for your kids to see you embrace something outside your comfort zone, and how good it is for our kids to see us embrace something outside of our comfort zone. I mean, I remember when we started lobbying, it was a whole new world, and the kids were with me, and, we were sort of learning it together. But I really appreciate that you said that, Ginny. And I think that's important for moms, especially because we can get sort of set in our ways a little bit.
Well, when I read that from John Holt, he said adults must use the skills they have so that kids can see them. And he used the word must. And I thought, I am not doing that. I'm just telling them what to do all the time. I thought that's a really different shift, homeschooling as modeling. And it's a gift to help you grow as a person. And then also for your kids to see kind of like the sky's the limit. They see me get up on that stage. They know I'm nervous. I tell them. They're like, Mom, are you excited? I'm like, no.
And I was up all night working.
I'm nervous as all get out. Yeah. No, I've never been more nervous in my life. Hope it goes okay. And then often they do see that it does go okay. And so they get to see that whole process.
Well, I know you love zinnias. And our dear friend Jan has flower gardens that are unbelievable. Yeah. And I'm proud to say that I have blue hydrangeas on my front porch that are fake. So I need to learn a new gardening skill, but so far I have a black thumb. The
zinnias will grow no matter what. So just start with that. And they grow a ton of flowers. They're pretty easy. So that's what I would recommend. I actually started my gardening journey with a book called Roots, Shoots, Buckets, and Boots by a woman named Sharon Lovejoy. And it is the most darling book. It's one of my favorite books I own. And it's about gardening with kids. So that's where I started, Zan. It was these are the 25 easiest things to grow. And zinnias was on the list. I was
that's
sold.
Funny. Okay, so I need to do that. I need to learn a new skill that my grandkids can watch me do and participate with me.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I've got a question for you. What is one of the craziest adventures your family has ever taken together or done outside? And did they survive it?
Well, we're all here, so we have survived. I would tell you that we have not done a lot of crazy adventures. And I think that's actually kind of important because when we talk about getting outside, often we're thinking about some of those bigger, crazier adventures. And I think you can find a lot of adventure near home, as cheesy as that sounds. I think it's the absolute truth. However, we did get invited to go to Moab Adventure Center in Utah. for this 5-day rafting trip down the Green River where you go to the bathroom in a bucket. And it's pretty cool, though, because you're along the river and you have no cell service and you're just together with a bunch of families that you don't know for 4 or 5 days.
Crazy. Yes.
Yeah. And you fly in this little plane and it lands on this dirt runway thing and you walk down to your boat and it's wonderful. There's so many cool things like that out there. We haven't done a lot of things like that, but if you start to adventure with your kids when they're young, there are a lot of opportunities to do things like that as they get older.
Okay. So before we go, I just want to talk about your 2 books really quickly. Okay. I always get the first one wrong, Until the Streetlights Turn Off.
Come on. Come on. Yes. Well, because you remember that, that was sort of what people would talk about. I guess it was a short period of time. There had to be electricity. And then up until maybe the 80s or 90s, people would go play. Nobody knew where their kids were, right?
Well, that's
you would just
right.
go
We
play.
were always outside playing until dark. Yeah.
That's right.
I think our favorite was Ain't No Boogers Out Tonight.
Yeah, and it was just part of the culture, and that completely changed.
I know. So, but I love that book. I think that book, if you read one thing about going outside, you need to read that book. And I also love the book that you wrote on homeschooling, Ginny. Homeschooling, you're doing it right just by doing it. I love the encouragement in your title. And I love that book. So that is a great book for parents to read as well. What is your favorite part of that book or the thing you learned from writing that book that surprised you?
Well, I want you to know that when I think about it in my head, I always think about it in the way you would say it. It's called homeschooling. That's what I think in my mind. Because I would say homeschooling. I think that sounds so boring. But Zan would say it, homeschooling. I believe in my heart of hearts that you are doing it right just by doing it. And there is a lot of fear around homeschooling because you think you might mess your child up. But I think that we're directing that toward the wrong people, especially today, because all of the things that we've talked about, we're going to be graduating our kids into a different type of world than we graduated into, that our parents and our grandparents graduated into. And so when you make the choice to homeschool, a lot of the things that seem like they aren't working well, like you don't know what you're doing. You haven't picked your philosophy. You didn't even know there was a philosophy that you could pick. You haven't read all the books yet. You don't know about the curriculums. I mean, I had a family, you know how it is at those conferences. They come up and they say, this is our first year. We have no idea. And you think, how could you not screw your kid up if you have no idea versus here's a person who has a degree? And yet it's just those very parts of homeschooling that almost seem like you're going in the wrong direction that are the right thing. So, for example, your child is seeing you learn something new. Your child is seeing you adjust as you go. And you're saying, we tried this curriculum, didn't like it. Let's try these BGU press materials, or let's try this. We read about this. I mean, really, for me, it's like, okay, I read the John Holt thing. I'm going to try that. I read the family economy thing. Can we look at our home as an on-ramp? Can we grow our business enough so that we can hire one of our children, as they start to graduate as maybe a part-time job for them? We are looking at year 19 as business mentors. That's what we're looking at. We have a business. And that's only because I read that John Holt thing. The only reason I have a business is because we homeschooled and because we were homeschooling, I read John Holt. See what I'm saying? It sort of snowballs. And so what happens over time, and this is the point, it's an overtime proposition, is that you look back and you say, okay, that time at 10 a.m. when I didn't have anything going on, I felt bad because the kids were bored and they were kind of poking at each other and I felt like I was failing. That actually is the cream of the crop right there. That's what you want. You want those interactions between siblings. You want some of the boredom. You want the kids to see in real time, firsthand, how do you create a life you love?
I love
all of that.
Right.
And they're
How
not
do you
pulling their
create
hair
life
out
you love?
because they
That's
have
right.
no control, and they're sitting in a class being told what to do all the time. And they're sitting. Kids are meant to move. So I believe you can't do it wrong. Sometimes people will be like, oh, there's people that neglect their kids. Well, I'm like, that's not homeschooling. If you're actually homeschooling, you cannot do it wrong. Even if you change your whole style, or even if you wish you were a little bit different than you are, even if you're struggling with the baby. Sarah McKenzie talked about that. She had a whole session on babies and toddlers that I sat in. It was lovely. There was like 1 million babies and toddlers in the room. And she was talking about, this is a family that God gave you. So God is going to give you grace. Don't wish away your baby. Don't wish away your toddler. Everyone is learning to be more selfless. Everyone's learning how to adjust for another person. Isn't that a wonderful thing? It's so wonderful. They're learning empathy. Did we talk about how there's this program called Roots of Empathy, where they hire babies to bring them into the classroom so that the kids will become more empathetic? Have we talked about that?
No, that's
We're talking
amazing.
too much, though. I don't even know how long this is supposed to go.
Great. No, I know. I quit looking at my watch a long time ago.
But it's an incredible program. And well, you look around the homeschool environment, there's babies everywhere. So this woman told a story. Her name's Michelle Borba, and she wrote a book called Unselfie. It's about empathy. And empathy is dropping. Narcissism is rising. It's all coinciding with social media. And so there's this program out of Canada called Roots of Empathy, where they bring a baby in over the whole school year, once a month, and they'll set the baby in the middle of the middle schoolers. And, they'll say, what's the baby feeling? Don't be too loud, learning to adjust to the baby and to read the emotions. And so this Michelle told this story in her book about how one time they lost the baby. Did I tell you this?
No.
So that, they have this whole program. They bring the baby in, they set the baby in the middle of the circle. Then the program's over. They're like, where's the baby? The baby is missing. Like, they can't find the baby. They're looking everywhere for the baby. And they found the baby with a middle school age boy. And he's like standing over in the corner, and he's holding the baby and he's rocking the baby. Maybe he's 12 years old, and he'd had a really rough life. Like, parents are in jail, not around. And he said to his teacher, he said, if no one has ever loved you, can you still be a good father? I thought, like, that's the power of a baby, And I think sometimes we look at our situations and we're like, gosh, like, if only I could if only I was better at meal planning, if only I was more organized, if only we'd finished the lessons, if only I didn't have this toddler that was spilling things everywhere, if only I knew more, if only I'd studied more in school, if only I had a better degree. But I don't think any of that matters. I think life is about walking alongside your family and giving them the best shot that you can give them, and loving them through it, and knowing that over time. And one of the things I talked about at the keynote, which has really become apparent to me, is that what felt like a sacrifice at the beginning, walking away from a career, walking away from a pension, walking away from a salary, walking away from healthcare, in time turned out not to be a sacrifice at all, and gave me...
But an investment. I think you mentioned that word. Yeah.
It gave all of us the best life that we could have ever had. Mm-hmm. But it took time to see it that way. And so I think you make the choice and then stick with it and wait for the fruit. It will come. It will come, but it comes in time.
Well, Ginny, thank you so much for being with me today. Thank you for what you've meant to the podcast and what you mean to me, and for celebrating with us for this 200th episode. Hallelujah.
200, Zanny, wow.
So
what an
tell
honor.
Everybody, I know they know, but just humor me and tell people how they can find you.
Yeah, everything is 1,000 hours outside, except for these 2 book titles, Until the Streetlights Come On and Homeschooling. And huge congrats to you, Zan. Huge congrats. People need to understand that you are out speaking at so many different places and sharing your bravery. I think that when you hear your story about your bravery of going into these different court cases and taking your small stature down to these just places where people maybe are not taking you seriously, or they're what you're saying is brand new to them. They've never even heard of it. And so being in the forefront of this fight to make homeschooling legal, it reminds you that maybe our struggles are not like you think, oh, would I be doing this if I also was being threatened with jail time? You know, it just reminds you that people have been brave who have come before us. And so we can be brave too in our own ways. And you're going and speaking at all these events, and it's a lot of work. It's a lot of exhaustion. It's a lot of pouring out, and it's wonderful what you and Joe are doing. And so huge congrats to you on 200 episodes. I hope people write in their reviews and say thank you and send you notes for all the ways that you've meant and things that you've meant to them, because it's a big undertaking and you're undertaking a lot. So congrats.
Well, thank you, Ginny. Well, we want to thank you for being with us today. We know you have lots of places you can spend your time. Thank you for spending it with us. As always, you can find me at zantyler.com and on social media. And until next time, bye.